In 2022, a study was conducted among Catholics gauging their adherence to 3 Catholic teachings: abortion, euthanasia, and the death penalty. What percentage of Catholics do you think agreed with church teaching on all 3 issues? 70%? 30%? 10%? Unfortunately, all 3 of these numbers would be all-time highs in the history of this survey. In actuality, the number of people who agreed with all 3 teachings came to 0.9%. 0.9. That's less than 1 out of every 100 people. Now, admittedly, when I see studies like this, I get a little skeptical and I have some questions. Were these regular church-going Catholics or people who hadn't been to church in 30 years? Were the questions worded clearly and accurately or with some intention to mislead? Given the complexity and controversial nature of these 3 issues, are they really the best to ask to gauge adherence to church teaching, or should we be caring about other issues? Questions like these should run through our heads when we encounter such staggering numbers as these, pumping the brakes so we don't overreact or make rash decisions as we are prone to do these days. I know for sure that there are a lot of faithful Catholics in the United States, and so this cannot accurately reflect what is actually going on in our churches. But it does sort of confirm a suspicion we all have, right? It does highlight a problem that we've all faced, particularly online. There is a disconnect between what the church teaches and what a lot of Catholics profess to be true. Some will see this data as further proof of Cafeteria Catholicism, that the vast majority of people pick and choose what they want to believe, actively disobeying the church and denying its authority. And maybe this is part of the truth. I have certainly met people who are obstinate in their beliefs and indignant towards church leaders. They just know better, right? But is that really the problem? Is that the case for the majority of Catholics? In my experience, at least, most people think that they are good people. Most people are trying to do their best. At least among those who attend Mass regularly, there is a real desire to be faithful to the teachings of Jesus and his church. For me, the disconnect between what the church teaches and what a lot of Catholics profess to be true is not the result of hard hearts. It's poor catechesis. I can almost guarantee that a large part of that 99.1% of people who held a belief contrary to church teaching believed that they were expressing church teaching. Surveys like this touch on a problem for sure, but it's important that we not latch on to the wrong cause. Rather than dealing with hard-headed people who hate the church, what I believe we have are faithful people that don't even know that they don't know. I wonder, and this may be more of a challenging question for some than others, but I wonder if this might describe you. I know it's easier to focus on the bad Catholics, the people who knowingly pick and choose what to believe, but is it possible that there might be some blind spots of your own faith? Teachings that you don't fully understand, or maybe ones you've never even heard of? I ask this without any sense of accusation or judgment. To me, this is just stating the obvious. Of course there are things that I don't fully understand. Of course there are still things for me to learn. To say no with any sort of confidence would be arrogant and foolish. How can you say that you know things that you don't even know you don't know? The question then isn't so much, is it possible that there are things we need to learn? Because of course there are. But rather, what am I doing to fill in those gaps, to learn something new, to make sure that my plate, as it were, has a complete balanced meal and not just things that I already know and like? For instance, how well could you describe the dogmas of the Trinity? If someone were to stop you on the street and ask you, is Jesus a God, a man, or some mix of both, how would you respond? These are, of course, mysteries, meaning that they can never be fully mined to their depths, but having a working knowledge of the creed and the essential qualities of God is kind of fundamental to being a Christian. If you don't feel confident in answering that, maybe spend some time with Section 2 of the Catechism. What about the liturgy? We attend Mass every week, offering worship and thanksgiving to God, but can you clearly and accurately explain how bread and wine turn into the body and blood of Christ? Or what about the role of the priest and why a Mass is completely different from a communion service? As a Catholic, the elements of the liturgy are not new and they are not random. Every single element has history and symbolism and add to our faith. If there's something you don't understand or couldn't explain, you might want to look it up in the general instruction of the Roman Missal, the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, or any number of popular commentaries. There is, of course, a plethora of questions when it comes to morality. What do you know about medical ethics, sexual ethics, mortal versus venial sins, vices, and virtues? Do you know what the principle of double effect is and why it's critical to a moral life? Can you explain why self-defense and certain military actions are allowed, but murder and the death penalty are not? What about how to handle ectopic pregnancies or what to do when the life of the pregnant mother is at risk? If not, Part 3 of the Catechism is a great place to start, but the USCCB's website has great answers to many of these questions as well. What about the spiritual dimension of our faith beyond the dogmas of God? Our life of prayer is so critical to the spiritual well-being of the Church, and yet most people do not know that the official prayer of the Church, what priests are bound to pray every day and what lay people are recommended to observe, is not the Mass, and it is not the Rosary, but the Liturgy of the Hours. If you've never heard of this or don't pray it as a part of your spiritual life, maybe give it a look. You can find the prayers for free online or download the iBreviary app on your devices. And what about the political, social, and economic life of the Church? It might surprise many to know that the Church defends labor unions, criticizes both socialism and capitalism, requires that richer nations care for the needs of poorer nations, puts limits on private property, and defends the rights of refugees to emigrate to other countries. How well do you know the principles of the common good, solidarity, and the universal destination of goods? If you could use a refresher, the Catechism is good, but even better is the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, an entire catechism devoted specifically to Catholic social teaching. Now, naturally, this is just a drop in the bucket. I've barely explained anything of what we believe in the Church, and there is so much more to learn, but hopefully is at least helpful in pointing out that there are multiple buckets: theology, liturgy, morality, prayer, and social action. You may know one of them really well. Maybe your faith has survived on it for years without even knowing that there were other buckets. But maybe this is a reminder to begin exploring the things you didn't even know you don't know. I do not believe for a second that the vast majority of Catholics, that 99.1% of them, are hard-hearted, stubborn individuals that make up their own gospel and openly reject the teachings of the Church. No. Maybe a few of them, but it's not that many. What I do believe is that there is just so much to know in our Church, and it is easy to develop blind spots or to even learn something incorrectly along the way and not realize it. For those of us working as ministers in the Church, helping to shepherd people to full life in the Church, this is critical to remember. What people need is not harsh judgments, tough love, and protection against bad Catholics trying to bring down the Church. What they need is gentleness. What they need is patience. What they need is authoritative, easily accessible resources for people to do the research for themselves. Because really, isn't that what we all need? Even those of us who have studied the faith for years and have a decent grasp of what the Church teaches have areas we need to grow in. Without the humility to admit that we might be wrong, without the persistence to keep asking questions, we run the risk of unknowingly becoming cafeteria Catholics, filling up our plate every day with the same food, having no idea that our body is lacking nutrients. If we want to be good, faithful Catholics, we need to learn to love it all.